Hello, screenwriters, and welcome to Writing for Screens Behind the Script Off-Season. This will be the first part of two parts examining my script off-season. My name is Glenn Gers, and I come to you here every Tuesday and Thursday, if I can make it, at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, doing some live streams on the subject of screenwriting and writing, creative writing in general. My name is Glenn Gers. I am a screenwriter, had a 25-year career in TV and movies, and now on my way out of the business. I am leaving behind some of the things I learned, had to teach myself in that 25-year career so that you don't have to go into it blind like I did. There's a lot of stuff I had to figure out for myself as I learned how to do this job, this weird business that it is. And this extremely weird art. What I tried to do on this channel is give you a series of lessons. This is my channel page. I am showing it to you because the first few playlists, Screenwriting Essentials, Screenwriting Tools, Skills, and Craft, and the Process, Being the Writer. This is where I have tried to be as hands on the wheel, technique, recipe, simple work that you can take lessons from, 10-minute videos on different topics that I learned about during my time as a screenwriter. I tried to give you as much evidence of what it's about, the thumbnail, the title. It says genre, flashback, dramatic action, whatever it is that I have to teach you about that subject in about 10 minutes. Try to keep it as clean and useful as I could. And then I do a bunch of these live streams to try and explore ideas and things that need more showing you how things go on the page or taking some more time, and also to answer questions if you have them. Although today, questions will only be about this script because I'm going to try and get this script done in two live sessions. Hello, Morbo. Hello, Michael. Hello, CG Fernandez. Greetings to Germany. Hi, Nathan. Good to see you all. So here's the deal. I wrote 20 years ago a Christmas script. It is Christmas week. It is the week after Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's here. And I thought this is the right time to talk about off-season. A link to this script in PDF form is available to you in the description of this video, or you could just go to my website, Writing for Screens, go to this tab Creative. Under Creative, you will see the script for off-season. You can click that button. It will show you a link to download the PDF so you can read along or read ahead or whatever you'd like to do. Hello, Captain Tim. Recently finished a walkthrough. Oh, great. I am so glad. This is going to be a little different. I'm going to not go quite as word by word. Hello, Wolf Powers. Good to see you. So here's the deal. This script, Off-Season, is the title. It is available to watch. This was actually made. It was a Showtime family movie. It is, I believe, currently Now and Then on the Hallmark Channel. Someone told me that they found it on Pluto TV. I don't know. It is not easy to find this, but there is a version of it watchable. There are DVDs, out-of-print DVDs out there. I wish it was easier to find, but I can tell you that it does exist and you can watch it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you a brief overview of the process by which this script came into being and how it got made. And then I'm going to go through the script, just talking about some of the elements about it that are interesting or unusual or have lessons hidden within them. That's the plan. That's what we're going to do here. So let us start by talking about where this script... Oh, first of all, spoiler alert. I will be spoiler heavy during this. So if you want to read the script first and you are not watching this live, most of you will not be, I advise you to hit the pause button here or put this video aside until you have read the script. It is available. The link is in the description. Okay, so I had been struggling to get into the film business, into the screenwriting business for 18 years before I started to make it. Started to make money and actually make a living at that and become a full-time writer. 18 years. The first 6 of that, I was a student, a high school student, a college student. And then I became an office temp for another 12 years. While I was writing scripts, writing every day. I had an agent during 10 of those 12 years. I had everything going for me. It still took a long time. It is not easy. You have to keep going. That is one lesson. But here's the interesting lesson. After I started to make a living screenwriting, most of the living that I made was in assignments. In other words, someone would say, we think you're a good writer. We don't want to use your script, but would you do a rewrite or an adaptation or write this for us for pay? That's what I was doing. I had now spent a couple of years doing that, making Hollywood money, but nothing of mine was getting made. And so with that money, I could afford to take time sometimes. Also, sometimes for me, when I write something, I work very hard in the morning. In the afternoon, I can't keep doing that. I'm sort of burned out. I don't want to do nothing. So sometimes I have like a second project, a back burner project. That's what this was. Anyway, I thought people are not making my stuff. I need to write one for me, write one that's just straight from what I think would be best. And I got this, I continually have ideas for things. I jot them down. I make a pile, just a folder full of ideas. One of the ideas was simply a simple sentence: Santa Claus on his summer vacation. I had an image of this jolly Santa-like old guy in a swimming pool in a motel in Florida. That was it. This was in the late 1990s. I had been working in Hollywood for a while, and that's all I had. I had like, oh, that's cool. That's a fun approach to a holiday movie. So that's not a story. That's an image. That's an idea. That's an area to work in. So I started to think about it, and I didn't really feel like I had it yet. I didn't know that I could write something about it until I thought about the idea of a kid with Santa, and Santa basically saying to this kid, you have to stop telling people I'm Santa because I am Santa. I wasn't really sure what this story was, but the idea that basically there's this kid who believes that this old man at the hotel he's staying at, is Santa Claus. And he's saying like, oh God, that looks like Santa Claus. And the guy pulls him over and says, you can't tell people I'm Santa because I actually am Santa. That was when I started to think, oh, that's an interesting story. Hello, Gig McFish. Hello, 1 Million Diamonds. Glad to see you. I'm talking about how I wrote, what the background was of this script. Basically, what I built from was this image of Santa. I began to think about Santa in relation to someone. That is how you get a story. It's when there are people involved in some form of encounter with each other, relationship. That's where the story comes from. And the idea of this sort of odd couple, kid who believes in Santa and this old man who may or may not be Santa, it sort of fell together very, very fast in my brain. This was one of those scripts, they happen now and then, where it just came very easily. I just was like, oh, I could do this. Oh, I could do that. It was remarkably short time to figuring out the story. Partly, I believe, because I wasn't worried about following any rules. I was saying, I'm going to do it the way I think. I've been spending a lot of time earning a living, doing it the way I was told to do by other people. And I needed to do one where I followed my own instincts. It's something, sometimes people call it one for them, one for you. The idea that if you are doing things according to the rules, according to the values of the market, according to what you think you should sell, every once in a while, ideally one and one, you should stop and just follow your instincts as purely as possible. If you're anything like me, you actually need to do that. Hi, Vicki Fox. Hello, Kirby Light. Okay, so that's what I did with this one. I said, you know what? I've been working for a couple years now, rewriting my work to fit what other people think I should do. often with interesting and valuable results, but still, I wanted to just do one for me. I also have always wanted to direct my own work, and therefore I wanted to write a low-budget indie story that was marketable enough that they would let me direct. It is very hard to get people to let you direct something. That is really hard. Harder than getting them to buy your writing. Tell you how hard it is. So what I was looking for was, I want some little indie, and the idea of something set in a cheap hotel in Florida or Southern California, some sunny climate. I know enough about indie productions to know that that's relatively cheap. You're staying around one place. It's relatively easy to film. I also wanted something that was very accessible. A holiday, heartwarming comedy seemed like, that's something that could sell. Holiday movies, so when they hit, every year they're going to run it again. I wish that were true. From what I now and then I see this running on the Hallmark channel, because Hallmark owns it. Okay, but the question was then, what is the story? What is the relationship between this kid and this old man who may or may not be Santa? Living in the back of my head was the model of Miracle on 34th Street, which is about a man who may or may not be Santa. So I knew that model. I was not trying to reinvent the wheel or break every rule. I was just saying, what would be my version of a heartwarming, fun, offbeat holiday classic? No, I did not get to direct this one. I'll tell you about that. Where my mind went, and when I really felt like, oh my God, this will be great, was when I thought, okay, it's not just about this guy who may not be Santa, it's about this kid. And I thought, why is this kid saying, I think this old man is Santa? Obviously, the most obvious answer would be very naive, innocent kid who believes in Santa. That didn't really strike me as an interesting story. What struck me as an interesting story, what I came to, was the idea that this kid was making up stories about people because of a traumatic past. This kid was an orphan. His parents had recently been killed in a car crash, and as a result, he is telling stories about people to vent his feelings, a fairy tale sense of how we deal with emotion. Once I had that character, everything was just what I've talked to you about, a process of questions. I kept saying, well, why is he there? And the answer was, he's there because having been orphaned, he was sent to live with a relative who works at the hotel. Things like that. Everything was, why? How does that happen? How would that work? What would follow from this? I'm going to walk you through the script, so I will show you piece by piece what those pieces were. But the important thing is, it very quickly became, for me, interesting when it wasn't just a cutesy story that the genre promised, but a sort of shaky, dark twist on that premise. And the question for me was, how can I make this the most heartwarming, lovable comedy with this dark center, with this engine of darkness? That's what made it interesting. Story about Santa Claus, honestly, not interesting. Santa Claus, to me, is not a really interesting character, unless he has some kind of conflict. What I knew was that there was an existing genre which I loved. It's an old Hollywood genre. It was at the time called comedy with heart. A character comedy, a comedy that was not afraid, old Hollywood was not afraid to mix comedy with a solid, emotional, non-funny story. One of my favorite movies, The Apartment, is a good example of that. In the 1980s and beyond, corporate Hollywood, which is not quite like old studio Hollywood, became much more uneasy about mixing anything. It was like, if you're going to do an action movie, all action. If you're going to do a romance or a comedy, it's got to be all laughs. Oh, really? The Off-Season is probably not the same one. Unfortunately, a lot of people have used this title. Off-Season We will check it, and if there is a link, I will tell you next session. Anyway, so off season, the idea for me was mixing comedy with emotional drama. To me, that's where you get the best stuff. The other thing that this brought me to was Dickens, because the man who basically invented Christmas as we know it was Charles Dickens, who was very big on mixing comedy and sentiment, very big on mixing social outrage and powerful emotions with very, very wild comedy. The other thing that I was coming from was I was very familiar with the genre of essentially theater comedy of the 40s, 50s, 60s. Neil Simon, Herb Gardner is a playwright that most people don't know anymore, but I found him extremely admirable. He's just a great writer. Herb Gardner wrote a play called Thieves, another one called A Thousand Clowns, one called I'm Not Rappaport. Anyway, that kind of writing, I had grown up on those plays and movies. They were in my bloodstream. I had watched them so many times and loved them so much that I had instinctively absorbed the style. And that's the point I'm trying to get here with this, is the reason that this script came easily to me and was worth doing was because I was working in a style, in a genre, in an understanding of story that was natural to me. It was something I had immersed myself in simply as a fan, and then as a wannabe, I was like, I want to do that thing that I've been a fan of. So we'll talk a little bit more about it as we go through the script. But if you've ever seen the plays of Neil Simon, Barefoot in the Park, The Odd Couple, Star Spangled Girl was a big favorite of mine. Most people don't like it. Neil Simon is a legend of Broadway theater in the 1960s, 70s, even 80s. His style, there's a certain joke heavy but character based is what I would say. I knew how to do that. I loved it. I had worked on it for years. It was a natural language to me. So what I was doing here was saying, what's my version of this genre I know? And I urge you to remember, when you are trying to do your own stuff, to do the things that you love the most. If you love sci-fi action, or if you love delicate romantic comedy, whatever it is, at least some of the time, spend your time exploring the thing you absolutely love most and that you feel most naturally that you have absorbed. That is the main lesson about this script, is do the thing that you love to watch and that you want to do. Hello, Camilo. And hello, Donna. Okay, yes, off-season 2001, starring Rory Culkin, yes, or Hume Cronin and Adam Arkin and Sherilyn Fenn. Pirated, okay, yes, absolutely, thank you. I will look, okay, could be, great. Wolf, if you send me by email a link to that would be super cool. There are versions of this out there. You can find this movie. Anyway, here's the thing. The other thing that I love is stories where you feel like, I truly don't know what's going to happen. To me, that is the ideal story experience. Is you watch something, you feel you know what the genre is, or you think you know what they're going to be doing, and yet at a certain point you hit a point where you're like, wow, that went somewhere I didn't expect. I don't know what's going to happen now. I don't know where it's going to go, but I want to stick around to find out. I trust that this is going somewhere. That was the most central principle to me. From the moment I thought, okay, I'm going to do a holiday movie about a kid who's been traumatized by being orphaned, I was like, okay, I'm off to the races, because most people would say, I don't know where this is going. And I really tried to make that the, oh, cool. Okay, for everyone who's looking for this, the YouTube channel Chicken Soup for the Soul, apparently there is a copy of this movie I am so glad. I can't wait for you guys to see it. Please do watch it if you can. It's also, you'll be able to compare the script to the screen version. It's interesting because one of the things about this is a remarkably stick to the script version. The version they made is very much the version I wrote. The things about it that made it difficult to sell, and not difficult for the audience to follow, but difficult for the business to understand, was it is an abnormal structure. I do not follow the rules on this because I was quite confident that once the audience was hooked into the story, they would go with the twists and turns that I was going to develop, even though it was not following the paradigm of a normal story. The biggest, weirdest thing about the structure is one major character, a good half the plot, shows up at the midway point. In other words, the story is very involved, and then a new character comes in. The story takes on its full nature halfway through. This is breaking every rule of screenwriting. I simply was confident enough that it was a good story and that this would be fun to have things break the rules. It is really, really important when you break the rules that you understand what it is that you are giving the audience, that you are not just saying, I'm going to break the rules because I don't feel like following the rules or in order to break the rules. I was breaking the rules because I trusted that by breaking them, I would give the audience a fresher experience, that they would say, I am so used to these movies being so routine that you can kind of tell where it's going from the very beginning. In this one, because of the unusual choices I made, I felt like people would be like, wow, I don't know what's going to happen now. And like I said, that was the crucial thing that I was trying to do here, was provide all of the required feelings in an unusual way. The other thing about this is that it's a story with no antagonist. So many screenwriting rules, screenwriting teachers insist that every story has a protagonist and an antagonist. This is simply not true. It's not true at all. One of the things that you can do is simply tell a story of very well-meaning people who have different ideas of what is good. And therefore, they are all trying to do good. None of them is an antagonist. None of them is doing bad. They simply understand things differently, and that is causing danger and lack of resolution to your main characters. That is not an antagonist. That is, at very best, an obstacle or people working at cross purposes. This is a story like that. There's no bad guy here. There's just a lot of people trying to do what they need to do and causing each other trouble. The other thing about that is I think that it works best when each character has some form of inner conflict. All of the main characters in this story have something that they want to do personally, or that they need, or that they fear, and something else that they want or need to do that is in conflict with it. It gives characters a rounded experience. You understand them as human beings because that's very often how our lives are. We have things that we want that are in conflict with other things we want, or things we're supposed to do in conflict with things we should do. The other thing about it is that I had too many endings. It appears to end, and then you kind of know that it's not the end, and then it goes on and there's another ending. I think the audience understands, in this case, that there's something not settled yet. And so therefore they're not disappointed. I think very often when you have a story with lots of endings, one of the big problems is the audience is ready to leave. Then more stuff happens. I don't think that this does that because they're not ready to leave yet. There's stuff unresolved. The other things I wanted to talk about briefly before we go through it, that you should look for when reading it or watching me walk through it. The writing was solid. At this point, I had been writing 20 years, nonstop, trying to be a screenwriter for 20 years. I was at that point very good at it. And this shows that. I felt confident about this one because I was working in a genre I understood, in a style I understood. And that's what I want to talk about here. The style here is purely theater or sitcom. People on a stage talking. Lots of different scenes, lots of use of the fact that a film can cut from place to place and time to time, but the context of almost every scene is simply two people having a conversation. Almost every scene is simply that. What's good about that is I'm good at the conversation, that the conversation is full of jokes and people trying to take dramatic action through their conversation, and that every single scene is about a simple thing. Very, very simple scenes. What's really remarkable about this script is how few complicated scenes there are. The last one I did, Ways to be Wicked, almost every scene was kind of complex. There was a lot going on. What's really, I think, interesting about this script structurally is that if you break down the scenes, each scene has one thing it's doing, it does it, and it gets gone. That's it. Almost every scene is only a single thing happening in a enjoyable way, and then it moves on. However, complexity is the combination of simple things, and that's what I would think this is a really good example of. Each scene in itself, pretty simple. Some flourishy dialogue, but honestly, almost every scene, one thing happens. Sometimes two or three. Almost always, if so, they're in discrete sections. So therefore, in theory, this should be a simple story, but it actually develops a lot of complexity because the way that you build complexity is by putting simple things that are in conflict with each other or disturbing each other's simplicity next to each other, subsequent to each other, cause and affecting each other. So that's what I think is valuable to learn from this. Really solid joke dialogue, character joke dialogue, and really, really simple beats. The other thing is there is a basic question of whether or not this man is Santa Claus in the story. That goes through the entire story, and because that is a question, that is the suspense of the story. The basic suspense that I came up with is this guy Santa Claus or not? Every scene can be read either way. There's a valid argument for either version. That took a fair amount of crafting. That's something that I just happen to be good at. I like the puzzle aspect, and so that's what it was. The game was to build a completely solid story, which never was easy. You were always worrying, is this telling me this or is that? It's sort of like Inception. Weirdly, it's a very similar kind of thing. At what point do you know what's reality in Inception? In this case, is this guy a con man or is he actually Santa Claus? How did I do the twistiness of it? How did I make a complicated script with such a simple premise? I do not know. It's instinctive. If you love a certain kind of story, you learn a certain type of story. That's really the lesson I'm trying to have here is when you look at this, if you like this, it is because I loved this kind of movie and I wanted to make one. And I urge you, again, consider that when you are choosing what you are doing. A lot of people will tell you, do this because it will be successful. As far as I can tell, the thing that is most likely to be successful is absolutely pursuing the thing that is deepest rooted in your fan heart, in your consumer of art heart. Okay. Chicken Soup for the Soul says it's a live streaming service. Interesting. Okay, cool. Yes, Time Bandits was indeed a children and adults film. Yes, I am indeed. Hi, Javier. Good to see you. Thank you for your Christmas wishes. Um, Hello, magic internet movie called Adams, and hello, Hofner. Good to see you all. We are about to plunge into the script. I'm briefly just going to tell you how it happened. I started writing the script sometime in the late night. I got the idea probably in 97 or so. And I wrote it much more quickly than anything else I've written. Because I was very confident on it, and I was not worried about anything except following my instincts. It made it a lot faster. Sometimes they go fast, sometimes they don't. Hi. Hello, Maria. Okay, I'm really glad to see you. Haven't seen you in a while. I hope your project goes well. So I'm just telling a little bit about how this script came to be. I wrote it very quickly in a break between two screenwriting assignments. By 1998, it was finished. It took 3 years from being finished to being filmed. And that's with an agent and I believe a manager at that point. Can't remember. But I had an agent in Hollywood. I was a working Hollywood writer. I finished my own indie holiday family comedy script. I said, let's try and take it out for me to direct. Me to direct was the biggest problem. What's really interesting about this is I didn't even understand why it was a problem. And that's kind of the key, because that is a real problem. If you don't know why people don't want you to direct as a first-time director, they're right. You're not ready to direct. You should be extremely afraid of the job of directing if you've never done it before. It's very, very complicated. And what I did not know was I understood the art of directing as a fan, as a theory, as an appreciator, and as a planner of it, but I did not understand the job of directing. And honestly, if you can't do that job, if you don't understand how the mechanics of working in a workplace with other professionals who do this job and expect the director to know the job of directing as a job, not just as an art. You can understand shots, you can understand cutting, you can understand all these things about it. But if you haven't actually watched and understood how a set runs, how a large group of people, even a small set, is usually 20 or 30 people who are all professionals in their own departments and depend upon the director to work with the production, to organize them and steer them. That is a part of the job that is very, very hard to even conceive of when you are watching things and saying, I want to make that. All I can do is urge you, if you want to direct your own work, or if you want to direct at all, to learn about the job of directing, the work of directing, how you have to work with the budget and the schedule, how you have to work with and there were 4 separate companies involved in making this project, which means that you've got 4 sets of executives and people who are giving you advice and notes and have expectations and needs. Very often, those requirements are for their own purposes, for whatever internal corporate shenanigans are going on, where they have certain needs for this project to do certain things. Very often, we need X person to be on the crew or in the cast because it helps our company. Not that it helps your movie. You have got a lot of things going on. There's often very, very different understanding of what the story is. And so therefore, I did not understand. I knew how to make this movie. I knew I could picture the movie, and I knew artistically what would make this movie work, and I was right about that. However, I had no idea, and until I had worked on film sets and seen it and directed a few things myself, I did not understand what I didn't understand. I didn't know how much I was not prepared. Um, so that's one of the most important things I learned from this. After 2 years or so of bringing it to companies, the companies would say, "This script is great. We can't do it with you as a director. We can't put $3 million production." This is a very low budget production, but still a few $1,000,000, and their company needs to make a profit for that. They need to sell it. It needs to be competent. And it is very often the case that an inexperienced director will not know how to finish the day, not how to get the coverage, not how to get the process of directing so that you compile the material which will be edited into the final shoot. The proportions, the amount of time you need to spend and the amount of time you need to let go of in order to get the work done is very, very demanding and complicated. So it was turned down by a lot of companies for that reason, because it was like, Glenn has to direct it. At a certain point, it became clear that I wasn't going to direct it. Nobody was going to make it with me directing it. And the question was I going to hold on to it and fight? I won't let anyone make this unless I direct it. Or was I going to say, if I just step aside, someone will make this thing, and that is to my advantage. And eventually that's what I did. That's what I realized. Okay, let me just quickly see what the comments are. Hi, Jen Holland. Good to see you. Yeah, sorry about the timing. If you get hired for an assignment, how does that go? I'm not going to be talking. I will take this note and do it next week, Kirby, because this week it's going to take me all of the next this session and next session to go this specific script. So I will answer this question next week. Okay, what do you suggest to write comedy? How do you write without the funny parts? No, absolutely not. You want to be funny at the beginning. This is a good example. I thought of this as, I imagine these characters as being funny to each other, putting themselves in funny positions or situations with each other, or the way that things are funny is either someone is behaving in a funny way in a certain situation, or that they are speaking in a funny way about a situation. And if you should be thinking, they would be doing that in this type of story, in this particular, I see this as funny. So the answer is no. When I wrote this, I thought this is going to be funny. It's a funny story, and I'm going to make sure that everybody is entering it with funniness as their main operating principle. That's a great question. I will try and talk about that as I go through, show you. Jero, Hyro, I am going to also only answer questions about this script today. I will answer this next week. For the next 2 sessions, because I'm on this one script, I want to just talk about this script. Did I prepare for directing? Yes. Oh, well, I didn't know how to prepare at the point that I did this. One of the reasons I didn't direct it. As I got better at directing, as I learned more about directing, yes, I believe it is very important to direct, to absolutely be very, very prepared. Okay, so let's get into it because there's still a bit of history about how this happened. When I let go of directing, as I said, 2 or 3 companies, they had partnerships. So that there was a company that initially read it, and they said, we work in conjunction with this other company. They put up X amount of money. I didn't understand their relationships. All I knew was that they all needed to team up. So I had to get the approval of all 4 sets of executives to say, yes, we want to make this movie. One of those companies was Showtime. Showtime was looking for companies to produce movies for them as a what was it then called a TV movie, it's a cable movie. The companies came together, agreed that they would do it. Showtime agreed that they would do it. What was interesting was I spoke to the guy who was running Showtime at the time, and he said, "Yeah, I know this had been." He said, "I knew this had been turned down a lot because people didn't get it. When they saw that it was a child in it, they assumed it was for children." And I think this happens a lot. This is not a movie for kids. I think it's somewhat acceptable to older kids. But the truth is, this is a movie about a child for adults. And the guy who was running Showtime at the time said, oh, yeah, this is one of those, a movie about a child having a story, but all the other characters are adults, and it is not a kid's movie. What's interesting about that, however, is at the time that they released it, it was made a Showtime family movie. They had a category called family movies. This was a family movie, which it perfectly well is. I was careful not to be, although there is some darkness in it. It fits within the old Hollywood safety zones. However, when it came to submitting it for awards, they put it in the children's film category, even though they knew full well it was not for children. But as a family movie, they could put it there. And they told me, they said, we did that because your competition was lower. In other words, if you went up against the other classy TV movies of the time, you would look very low budget. The cast wasn't as impressive as some of the big movies being made. And you were working against some really high power writers. But if you put in the children's category, I was up against kids movies and I looked like a freaking genius. And that's why I won the Emmy, because I was in that category. So I gotta give them props for that, but it is kind of bizarre what it won for and what it was nominated for in the Writers Guild was Best Children's Movie, which it is not. The other thing that I want to talk about briefly is the idea that the thing I didn't reckon with, that I didn't understand that early in my career, I was only 2 or 3 years into professionally writing, how many people can love a script, sign on to produce it or be involved with it, and not understand it. This happens so often. Ask any screenwriter. They will talk about the fact that very often people will simply say, like in this case, this is a story about a man who may be Santa Claus or maybe a con artist. Very hard to tell which he is. And one of the directors read it and he's like, well, I don't want to tell a story about a con artist. So therefore, I want to wipe out that part of the story. The entire story would fall apart. There would literally be no story if that ambivalence, if that suspense, which one is he, was not operating. Very, very often, somebody else said that they felt like they needed to spend more time with the heroine, meaning the character who plays the kid's aunt. What's interesting about that is that she's not the main character. She's just not. It's always shocking to me when you write a script to find that someone doesn't understand who the main character is. And they liked it very much. They just felt, well, it's sort of incompetent. You haven't spent enough time with this main character. The reason that you haven't spent as much time with that main character is she's not the main character. Anyway, so those are my notes before getting into it. Let me just see quickly. I'm going to read through some of your questions here. Okay. I came across a Santa who was rather mean. My Santa is quite mean. That was part of the fun. Oh, you're very welcome, Errol. Very, very glad. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Let's get into it. So I'm not going to detail every page, but I want to talk a little bit about this opening because it's something I think is a useful lesson. Hook the audience. The whole point of the writing of this first page was it's far more descriptive than the rest of the script put together. Very rarely, now and then I would stop and be writerly to describe, use fancy language, and most of the time I was trying to just be very clean and simple. But what I wanted to do is in the very first lines, if possible, you want to do something to hook the reader. In this case, it was very simple. It's raining in paradise. That's not, that's just a sort of mood setter. I was trying to say, hey, I'm going to tell you a story. Something is going to be off. Raining in paradise. So you're going. That's the vibe of this entire story. Then I describe a lot of description here. And I was trying to make this funny. The Blue Grotto, a swanky late 50s pastel tropical Mondo jet set Florida hotel. That's a joke. It's a funny way of piling on the adjectives and making sure that they seem sort of flamboyant in order to say, hey, we're going to be in this world, this mid-century modern, but long forgotten tiki hotel kind of place. And then this is just pure, I wanted to give you a feeling of the style of the movie visually, which I was going to not spend much time going into. Rain stipples the glowing turquoise water of the pool. Palm branches flutter in the storm, lit from below by garish outdoor lights. Watermelon and lemon and violet. I'm trying to give you the juiciest, most specific imagery in order to give a larger atmospheric issue. Rain stipples the water of the pool. That's a shot, but mainly it's a detail. Okay, the turquoise water of the pool. The pool is lit up. It's glowing in vibrant colors. The lights are reflected in 1,000 glittering wiggles on the wet driveway. Okay, this is very fancy writing. The purpose of this is to hook the audience the way that the opening of a film would do visually. But having done that, and I don't go that far, it's just 3 paragraphs, only one of which is a real paragraph. But I've hooked you in, and then the story begins, and it's pure, this happens, this happens, this happens. A car slishes up, horn honks, nobody comes out for him. The guy gets out, cursing, in the rain, drags his bags in. Okay? We're thinking, who's this guy? What's happening? So there's, like I said, very simple. All that we have is some visual atmosphere and a guy pulling up at the hotel. The next part, he comes in and we see Jackson Mayhew, age 10, lying on the carpet, observing from behind a sofa. In other words, I am making Jackson interesting. The important thing is to make us know, okay, this kid is important. We are now seeing the center of our story. So the scene is this middle-aged man comes in. He's got a reservation at this terrible hotel. And this kid who's lying on the floor behind the sofa watching things goes behind the desk and tries to check him in. So right away, we're getting a sense of Jackson's character. Jackson is inappropriately grown up and absolutely deadpan. So he says, can I help you? Guy says, I have a reservation. Jackson is very professional. Welcome to the Blue Grotto. But he can't actually do that. He's not even tall enough to reach the desk. Hotel desks are higher than normal desks, check-in desks. Milton says, are you supposed to be doing this? Jackson says, I own this hotel. Now, we now know Jackson lies. Jackson just makes shit up. That's the key to this story, is going to be that Jackson tells stories to express his fears and pain. That is the quality of his character that is driving the entire story. It is on page 2. It's actually kind of on page 1 because his behavior is he is acting out this fantasy of being an employee of the hotel when he is not. So Mona comes in. She works at the hotel. She checks him in. And Jackson just keeps staring at Milton. This kid is unusual. He's offbeat. So in this scene, it's very, very simple scene. This guy checks in. This kid is acting weird and inappropriate, which makes the older man nervous. So he pulls a car, a toy car that he's bought for somebody, out of his bag, unwraps it, and it's the kind with you rev it with the motor. If you rev the wheels, it will drive. He does that. It goes zooming towards the kid, and the kid just stares. Stands looking at it with a frozen, stoic expression. And Mona hastily sends him out. Go. Go find your aunt. Milton looks at the kid walking through the big empty lobby. I don't understand. So in this scene, very, very simple. We are introducing Jackson in the hotel. Clearly, Milton is not that important a character. But what we are saying is there is something wrong in this kid's life. There is something off here, something troubling. And whatever it is, it has to do with cars. So the thing I want to talk to you about here is the idea that you are letting the audience work. You are not telling the audience everything. You give them a simple clue and let them work from there. It is very evident that there is something wrong for this kid with cars. The answer is going to be told in the next scene, that when Milton talks to his aunt, and I'm not going to talk you through every scene. I don't want to waste your time. Please read the script. There's a link in the description. I'm just going to talk about the operating principles, the writing lesson. I really do want this to be a writing class for you, not just a, hey, isn't my script great? The point about this is that what I'm doing is simply by laying out small elements of the story in a behavioral way between characters, I am letting the audience puzzle out what's happening. That's what makes people want to follow a story. If I had just had her come in and, Mona at the desk said, this is Jackson, he blah, 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 which many bad exposition scenes do, there would be no reason for the audience to care. But now they're like, something's up with this kid, but I don't know what it is. And then as we watch Patty, his aunt, and he's talking, it's clear that he's upset. He's sitting on the floor behind the bar. She's making him a drink, non-alcoholic. And Jackson starts to, he starts to tell a story about Milton. In other words, he's trying to express himself, but he can't express his feelings directly. So what he does is he tells disturbing stories. That's how Jackson is dealing with trauma. So he said, I think we've got a guy who launders drug money checking in. Patty, basically, she's lived with him for a while now. She understands that Jackson does this thing to deal with his anxiety or his pain. So she's playful with him. So he says, you think so? He says, yeah, I think, but he's in big trouble. She says, too much fabric softener? In other words, launders drug money. That's the kind of Broadway sitcom comedy jokiness that I wanted to establish right away. That is going to be the language of this script. People are going to make jokes. Sometimes they're just going to talk in a funny way, but very often they're going to say funny things about what the other person said. When you watch sitcoms from the 1960s, 70s, that's how it worked. People would say funny things in response, bouncing off what the last person said. So Jackson gets real dark. Not too much fabric softener. He says, no, he's been double-crossing his bosses down in South America, and they found out. So they kidnapped his family, sent him one of his children's ears as a warning. And Patty says, you're not watching Nickelodeon that much anymore, are you? In other words, she's not making him feel bad about what he's doing, but she needs to acknowledge that he's deliberately crossing the line. So even though there's a good joke there, you're not watching Nickelodeon that much. This little 10-year-old boy talking about somebody cutting off children's ears and sending them to their drug dealer parents. This is dark. And Patty's trying to make him not feel bad about it, but at the same time trying to reach out in a joke to say, I hear you, you're in pain. Milton comes in and he's like, wow, he doesn't see Jackson. Jackson's on the floor behind the bar. So he says, he's like complaining as a businessman would. He comes down, it's raining, he's having a problem. And then he meets he said, then there's this kid at the front desk. Patty is uneasy because she's Jackson's aunt. She's responsible for him. She's worried about him. Jackson is shaking his head. No, I did not do anything. And the guy says, yeah, no. And he tells us about the car. And Patty goes, oh, no. Bill goes, oh, yes. Like, I fucked up. And Patty says, what happened? Bill says, nothing, because it's true. The kid just walked out. He says, I feel terrible. You want to make a kid happy, you tear his psychology open, which is a funny way of saying that. That's like, it's a very old school, old man way of talking. Anyway, that's it. That's all we know yet. We still don't know what's happened. It's going to be 4 or 5 scenes before we find out that the actual detail is that that Jackson was Patty's sister's child, and that Patty's sister and her husband died in a car crash, and all of a sudden Jackson had to move in with Patty. That's the story. I'm not going to give you that whole story right away. I'm hinting at it in a way that by only giving one step at a time, understanding something bad happened to this kid. We are, and now we know that she's his aunt. We are understanding that the center of this story is revolving around this kid and something that happened to him. So we move on to that night. Patty and Jackson share a hotel room in the hotel. He's watching TV. She comes in after work. He's not supposed to be watching TV, so he hastily turns it off, gets into his bed, pretends to be asleep. And they have banter. The key to this relationship, the key to this style of comedy is the way that people relate to each other through dialogue. In the case of Patty and Jackson, the way that they deal is they are constantly bantering back and forth. He's basically saying provocative things, and she is basically refusing to take the bait, refusing to be upset, refusing to criticize him, but at the same time playfully acknowledging that he is being inappropriate. It's her way of letting him feel safe. So Jackson once again talks more about this guy, tells him even a new dark story. She just says, go to sleep. And then, so he's trying to push her, and she won't come down on him. She accepts his expression of the darkness of life that he has faced. So he goes, but she says, stop talking, go to sleep. As he does, he starts to be quiet, and then she starts to sing. Her storyline is going to have to do with the fact that her dream in life is to be a singer in a bar. So she's singing to herself, and he asks for a specific song, the one that Mom liked. And then the scene ends with Patty singing the song as she's getting ready for bed, and he's in sleep. Okay. I'll do 1 or 2 more scenes, and then the rest of it we will do next session, day after tomorrow. All right. So the next scene, by the way, what we've established here is we've established that Jackson is at this hotel kind of inappropriately living at a hotel. He's 10 years old. He's living with his aunt. Something bad happened. The hotel is rather run down. So now we have a scene with Patty and Mel, the hotel manager, in his office. And this is just straight out comedy, sitcom, Broadway comedy type dialogue. She starts by saying, you told me I could sing in the lounge if I worked the bar, and now you won't let me. That makes you a liar. He says, No, it makes me a coward. The lying is just a side effect. That's the joke structure. In other words, he's taking off from what she says and being funny in a way that's also admitting that he is in fact lying and he is in fact doing her wrong. When he says, no, it makes me a coward, she picks up on that. She says, what have you got to be scared of? I'm the one who's maybe making a fool of herself. And then Mel explains, Milton, who checked in last night, he's from the corporation that owns the chain of hotels that owns this hotel. And what he basically says is, our hotel is in trouble. If we can't bring in more people, more money, we're going to get closed. So he says, so whatever we do with the lounge, where Patty works and wants to sing, so she says, whatever we do with the lounge, it has to be some sort of attraction. Essentially saying, if you sing, it's not going to help us. She says, thank you, Mel. I'm just saying, she says, I only took this job so I could sing. In other words, in this scene, Patty is, the action of this scene is Patty going to Mel and saying, I took this job so I could sing in the bar, but you won't let me. She's essentially saying, let me sing, or else, basically. She says, I took this job so I could sing. He says, well, you're getting a free room. She says, I can't eat a room. I can't buy gasoline. She's taking the job for basically nothing in order to get a chance to sing. He says, you keep all your tips. She says, there are no tips. Nobody comes in the bar. So Mel says, so there would be no one to sing. There's their back and forthing. This is the fun of this argument is that she has something she wants. It's almost like fencing. He's trying to deflect her, to argue her out of it because he does not want to let her sing because he's worried about the hotel and he needs to find a way to draw in more people. What happens is basically this goes back and forth for a full page and a half, almost 2 pages, of them debating whether or not she should be allowed to sing. And he says, yeah, but now you've got a kid to take care of, so a free room is a big deal. You know, that's something good. She says, you know what I'm famous for, Mel? Okay, so by the way, this pause, she is making a mental adjustment. She is changing from I'm trying to convince my boss to I am about to threaten my boss. She says, you know what I'm famous for, Mel? He says, nothing. He says, in situations of adversity, when I'm in a really bad position and somebody thinks they've got me, I do self-destructive stuff like quit jobs, which is interesting because we're now learning something about Patty. Patty may be a down-on-her-luck bartender wannabe singer, and she may have, as we'll find out in the rest of the story, had a pretty messed up life in many ways. However, she's actually not a victim. She is always strong and willing to burn bridges in order to keep her self-respect and not be treated badly. He says, you're bluffing. They do a game of chicken about whether or not she can stay. She'll quit. She pushes it all the way to opening the door, and Mel folds. She's stronger than Mel. She is, even though she is the one who came in begging, she is the toughest person in this room. So he gives her the deal. We move directly now. So by the way, this is an interesting thing. We have now watched a series of scenes which have built to Patty's goal of singing. Now, in order to get to that scene, we actually had 3 scenes about Jackson, but people in the business look for whoever the character is who states their goal at the beginning, and they say that must be the main character. Patty is not the main character. Jackson is the main character. But in an old-fashioned story, in an old Hollywood story, you can have many characters who are all rich and have their own storyline. That simply makes the story better. And you'll spend time with them. As the movie business got more optimizing, as it got more fearful, they said, if you have a main character, they have to be so clearly the main character that any idiot cannot possibly mistake anyone else, and everyone understands the story. Hollywood executives tend to be terrified that the audience won't get it. And as a result, stories with any sort of complexity or subtlety, they simply ignore the complexity and subtlety and believe you are failing to be obvious, as opposed to succeeding at being complicated. So that's what I got a lot of, is people didn't understand the story, because while Jackson will be the center of the story, I needed to explain his relationship to Patty, so I spent some time, just one scene, explaining Patty's need, which will become an important part of the story. So, having established the Patty's goal of singing in the barn, Mel says she has to get a band to do it. So then we cut right to, and this is directing with the page. I went from ending the scene with the agreement that she can do that if she will get people to play music for her to sing to a bunch of cassettes and resumes and envelopes. She's put out an ad for a backup band, and now she is looking through it. But I'm saying I'm starting on that because that says to us, it's exposition. Patty must have found in some way backup bands to submit their stuff to her. So there's all kinds of bands. There's a typo here. It should say 8x10. She is looking at this by the pool with Jackson. So we're right back to Jackson. And Jackson is helping her in his 10-year-old way. So he's helping her look through the headshots and resumes and listen to the cassettes. He says, these are all from one classified ad. So in case you guys didn't understand from you need to hire a band to cassettes and resumes of a band, he's saying you put out a classified ad for a band. She says, there's a lot of people out there desperate to make it in show business. He says, yeah, good thing you're not one of them. Jokes. Every scene is all about how can I tell this beat in the form of jokes, of bantering comedy between characters. It's not a joke that stands alone. It's a setup punchline joke. In other words, sorry about that. Setup and punchline. She's saying, yeah, a lot of people out there desperate to make it in show business. He's saying, good thing you're not one of them, which means, of course, she is one of them. That's the joke. Patty gives Jackson a look like, okay, fine, I'm desperate to make it in show business. He shrugs. Milton comes out, and Milton, the guy we now know is in charge of deciding whether the hotel will stay open, jumps in the pool, and we meet Sam. Sam is this old man. I describe him as rotund and white-haired. Eventually, having run through a handful of rotund older actors, they got Hume Cronin, who was skinny as hell, but quite an old man, a legendary actor, a brilliant, historic character in Broadway and Hollywood. And in some ways, because there was a fear, like, is it okay that he doesn't look like Santa? But considering the way the story works, I and everyone else felt, yeah, it's great that he's not a problem that he doesn't look like Santa. In a way, it's kind of more fun. But, would it have been cool to have Ed Asner, who turned it down? Sure. The point about Sam is that he always wears different hats. And I just put a little note in here into the script. The wave from Milton jumping in the pool has swamped Sam Klausner as he swims, knocking his big straw sun hat off. During the course of the movie, Sam wears a variety of hats, sporty but not silly. The point about Sam and the hats is that he's going to tell us he is a hat manufacturer. He's a guy who has a hat factory, which obviously puts him as it's a business, but it's also a character trait that he can always wear these hats, and he's always talking about hats. Yeah, thank you. Anyway, So all we know when we meet Sam is, hello, Ruel. Nice to meet you. When we meet Sam, he's getting, Milton is clumsily splashing him with a wave. His hat falls off. And Sam says, hey, you moron. So not your basic Santa. The thing about Sam in the next few scenes is he is going to be the most mean-spirited, or not mean. He's not mean. He's just not interested in other people. He's self-centered and brusque and funny in his insulting way. So when Milton splashes him again because he sees Jackson, Sam says, Jesus, don't tell me. When you're not on vacation, you're an air traffic controller. In other words, Sam is insulting Milton. So the point is, this is not somebody that we would think of as jolly. So Jackson and Patty are paying no attention to this, but Patty's working on her band stuff. So she says, why don't you go for a swim? And Jackson says, I'm afraid of the dead body. What dead body? The one Mel put under the drain. So basically, once again, Jackson is single-minded in his pushing this darkness button, pushing this inappropriate for kids button. And Patty asks him a couple of questions. She says, the hotel manager said, he killed the bartender before you and put her in the pool drain. She says, you don't really believe that, do you? And he says, I don't know. In other words, he doesn't entirely know why he's doing this. He knows he feels the need to stop everyone from saying everything's going to be all right. Because for him, he has had living proof that life is often not all right. And he just needs everyone else to admit it, to help him with it. Anyway, so Jackson keeps saying really harsh things. And she says, why do you always make up such horrible things about people? In other words, we've watched him do this 3 or 4 times now. And Patty has been dealing with it by being playful about it. But now she's like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? He says, I don't. It's just pure childhood. It's just denying. She says, you do. Name me one thing you think about people that isn't creepy. So basically, she is challenging him to make up a pretty story, a nice story, a non-scary story. So that's when Jackson looks around and says, that guy over there, the white old guy, he's Santa Claus. In other words, Jackson is trying to prove there's a dramatic reason that this action takes place. It has nothing to do with Sam. It has to do with his relationship to Patty. We have learned that Patty is trying to help Jackson. Jackson is trying to figure out how not to beg for help, but somehow express his need for help. In trying to talk to him about it, she says, you always do this thing. Why do you do it? And he's like, I don't. And so she says, okay, tell me something nice. He says, Santa Claus. Just the first nice thing that he can think of. He's on vacation. It's his off season. She says he doesn't have a big white beard. So now we explain why he doesn't look like Santa. He doesn't want everyone to know who he is. That's why he's staying here too, instead of a good hotel. And then she says, okay, let's go with this. Let's see how far we can do the nice thing. Where's Mrs. Claus? Don't say she's dead. No, she's alive, but they're talking about getting a divorce. In other words, he couldn't help it. He just had to go dark. She just says, you are a very disturbed little boy. And then she says, I'm sorry, because she's just named the thing that they can't talk about, which is Jackson is a very disturbed little boy. He is very traumatized and he doesn't know how to deal with it. So he's telling these dark, dark stories. And having pushed that button and upset his aunt, he just pushes further. He makes up a dark story about Santa and his wife having marital problems. She says, I'm going inside. I want you to concentrate on telling pretty lies that make people happy like everyone else does. And she says, okay. That's that's going to have repercussions. This question about, can he be kind? Can he tell lies that don't upset people? Hey, Gene. Thank you so much. So glad to have you here. We're sharing. I'm going to do one or two more scenes, then we're going to stop. Basically, what happens next. So the way that I've been building the structure is we're establishing the problem. The problem is Jackson and his trauma, and the way he's dealing with it is making up dark stories. So next scene, Patty has to go out for a few hours and meet some people about a band. So almost always, it's the very simplest thing when you ask, how do you structure it? Use what you have. I need Patty in this next scene to set Jackson up on a play date with these other kids. Why? Well, we know that she's trying to set up a band. She's going out to meet people from a band. Whenever possible, use what you have. Use the elements that you've already established for whatever reason. That's what we're doing here. So she says, listen, there's more jokes about Jackson being dark. And then Patty says, listen, I have to go out. There's a family here staying here at the hotel with kids about your age. I have set you up on a play date with them. He just keeps making jokes. Like she says, did you notice the Murchison family when they checked in yesterday? He says, the ones who came here from another planet, a galaxy in human form to destroy the planet Earth. In other words, he's just riffing. I mean, it's not like these are believable. He's just always pushing this button in a comical way. And she just like, yeah, them. I set you up on a play date. He says, play date? She says, that's what it's called anyway. Remember, Patty just recently found herself raising a 10-year-old boy that she doesn't know anything about kids. So she says, I haven't had a play date since I was 5. He says, sometimes it's really obvious that you don't have kids. So they are bantering, they are joking at each other about the core real story. That's the method of this kind of comedy. It's all dialogue based. In other words, they are working out their problems through saying funny-ish things at each other. She gets on the nose. She says, I do have a kid. I have you. You don't want to admit you're a kid? Fine. I set up a childhood anonymous group meeting for you and the Murchison children this afternoon. In other words, she's going to top his jokes. People are joking at each other. It's a very, very particular approach to writing scenes. As you've seen from my other scripts, I don't always write this way. This is a very specific, jokey way because that's the type of comedy I committed to. And so the game here is, in every single scene, can I find ways to operate in this style? So the last scene, and then we're going to stop for today. Hello, Peter. Thank you very much. Yes, this is a story about emotions. It is not. Yeah, exactly. Tiny Tim. Well, Tiny Tim has real problems. So now we see Jackson with these kids. Zachary and Irma, they're around his age. Irma's a little younger. But the thing is, they are pretending not to hear these kids' parents sitting nearby arguing. Okay? They're just a bickering, angry pair of parents. And then the kids, meanwhile, are talking. Irma, the little girl, says, your mom is really pretty, Jackson. He says, she's not my mom. Zachary bluntly says, my mom says your parents are dead. Yeah. Irma, only 7, says, like, so we're talking about the elephant in the room, the thing that has been brooding over Jackson. Adults treat him a certain way. they treat him with kid gloves, or in Patty's case, with jokes. But these kids are wrestling at kid level with this, which puts Jackson in a new position. He is not going to do to them what he does to adults. So he's very straight with them. Dead means they've gone away and are not coming back. Right? Jackson says, right. Irma says, sometimes I wish mine were dead, because their parents are angry. They're angry all the time. Jackson says, no, you don't. So Jackson is the grown-up in the room with these two other kids. This is the other side of the same issue that we found with Jackson, which he has been forced to grow up too soon. He is 10 years old and he lost his parents, and it has put him with an awareness of suffering that ideally kids should not have, that Irma does not have. Jackson sees that Irma is distressed that her parents fight all the time. And so he says, look, that kid is in it. He recognizes what his aunt said to him: tell pretty little lies that make people feel better. In other words, Jackson is capable of redirecting this ability of his to make up provocative stories to be kind. This is really, really important that Jackson is taking a different action. Jackson has spent 15 minutes of this story hitting exactly the same note relentlessly. He has been the child who is suffering and making it clear that he needs help. But here, with a child who is suffering, who's younger than him, who's more innocent than him, he's actually kind. He says, look, there's Santa Claus. And it's very, he's just being kind. He's just being simple and trying to make them feel better. Even though he himself can't do that. Nobody can do that for him. He does it for these two more naive, innocent kids. And then I just put that the older kid, Zachary, says he's too skinny, which also helps with the fact that Hume Cronin was, I don't believe that line was in the original script. And then he says, too skinny, which implies that he believes in Santa Claus. So and there is no Santa Claus. And Jackson just keeps going with the bit. He's like, no, he's on vacation. And it's Jackson's conviction that this guy is Santa Claus is pretty impressive to the other kids. He's like saying, like, let's just play it. Let's just believe in this magic. And then some college kids nearby kick a football near Sam, and Sam kicks it into the pool. So Sam is pretty evidently not Santa Claus, at least in his behavior. And I think we'll leave that there. So that is okay. That is where tomorrow we're going to race through the rest of the script, talk about how this thing operates as I've done. Hopefully the messages that you will get from my breaking this apart, aside from just how this particular script works, is how you build your own scripts your own way. This one is very specific genre. In different genres, you would be very, very different. The whole point is you don't do what I did, you do the way I did. You take the approach, which is using this mechanism, this type of script. How do I build mine to do the most of that thing I can do? That's the lesson I'm trying to show you. Thank you. Thank you. You can imagine the scenes playing out. Yes, thank you. That is what I hope you can understand from seeing these scenes is one of the most important things that I want to show in this one is how simple each scene is. There's very little happening in each scene. There's some back and forth flourishes in the dialogue. We're playing with it, but honestly, in one scene, Patty says, I want to sing, and she pushes Mel, and Mel says, okay. That's all. That's what that whole scene is. The next scene, she's going out, and so she tells him there's a play date. That's all the scene is. There's really, really nothing else going on there. The whole point is that each of these actions is building us to a situation where a thing will happen. Having her get the okay from Mel means she has to go out to operate the band, which means she has to put Jackson with the other kids, and that is going to trigger the plot. The way that you build something like that is you think, how am I going to get this kid to provoke Sam to interchange with him about the fact that he's Santa? So therefore, people have to be saying he's Santa. What I was thinking, well, how is it? I knew where I wanted to get was that Sam would say, hey kid, stop telling people I'm Santa because I'm really Santa and you're screwing me up here. So I had to reverse engineer from that issue of why was Jackson telling people he was Santa? That's a weird thing. That telling people became the motive for me to give Jackson this mechanism of lying, of making up dark stories. Because it's a weird thing to do, to go around telling everyone that this guy is Santa Claus. There has to be a reason for that. I reverse engineered, he's a kid who tells stories about strangers. And then I thought, why? Because he's suffering because of his tragedy. Then I had to build up, how does the lie spread? How does the story of Santa Claus spread in this hotel? And I thought, if he told other kids, they would believe it. And so that's where this play date came through. Always a process of questions. That's the most important thing. Use what you have in a process of questions. I knew I had to have this story about Santa Claus and it had to spread enough to piss off Sam. So therefore, I thought, how am I going to get it to spread? Telling other kids seems like one good way. That's the kind of thing, what I'm trying to show you is by breaking down this, by reverse engineering it, because usually when you watch a script, you don't know what was motivating the writer to do that. Partly it's just, I want this to be funny. Oh, this would be cool. But partly there is a thing that you are trying to explain or a thing you are trying to get to. Forgive me, I'm about to sneeze. Anyway, excuse me. That's the lesson I'm trying to teach here is if you are building something and you only have a little bit, you just have this one idea, build out from that idea in all directions. It could be in the middle of the story, it could be the beginning of the story, it could be the end of the story. If you have something that you know you want to do, which is to get to the point where this man says, shh, I'm Santa, how do we get to that? And then you have to think of the logic by which people would behave in such a way that that becomes believable. That's the lesson for the day. Okay. Great. Yeah, tomorrow. No, it's Thursday. Day after tomorrow, I will do the rest. Okay, thank you so much. I am so glad that you guys are liking it. Yes, being original, that was my operating principle. How can I do this completely familiar thing in an unusual way, in an unexpected way? Now, that's not the only way to write. Some people would say, how do I do this completely familiar thing and strike every note in the most familiar way? That's a legitimate plan. You can do that, but whatever it is, know the principle that you are operating under. That's the thing. Thank you so much for your thanks. Thank you for the Gesundheit. Excellent. Oh, I'm so glad, Maria. Maria is working on a Star Wars fan fiction project. I am very excited about that. Great. Listen, all of you, I will see you the day after tomorrow, Thursday. We will do the rest of this script. The link is in the description. Please read the script if you can. I think it would be great. There's a lot of spoilers yet to come. This gives you 2 days. Read the script because there's some really cool twists and turns. I would prefer that you read it than that I tell them to you. Okay, go write something.